When we speak about the so-called gay agenda, asking the question, are we there yet, the issue of law and social justice is at the forefront. Now, despite the successful fight for federally sanctioned even marriage equality, discrimination based on stigma remains a huge battle for the LGBTQ plus population in and outside of the court system.
And here to bring us forward on law and policy concerns are two experts. First, Omar Gonzalez-Pagan, staff attorney at Lambda Legal, one of the country's oldest legal advocacy organizations for gay rights. Welcome to BK Live, Omar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining us. And we're happy to have the Director of Policy at Housing Works and a dear friend of mine, Vreeland, who works on legislative policy initiatives around housing discrimination specific to the LGBTQ community. Reed, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Now, you both work around correcting legal injustices and helping folks exercise their rights. What are some of the specific areas of focus for you right now? Omar, let's start with you.
Sure. Well, I mean, that video you just showed hit so many points because that's the battle we've always been having.
Right.
And it's a battle that's continuing. When you're talking about the rights of transgender people and their right to live freely in public society, be able to go to school, work, a movie theater.
The restroom.
The restrooms. Those are the very same arguments that they're using. It's the use of fear, misinformation, and ignorance to label LGBTQ people as deviants or not worthy of respect. And the gay agenda is a simple one. It's equal opportunity for everybody, and it's recognition of equal worth and dignity. And that's the battle we've been forging for the last 40 plus years at Lambda Legal, and the battle we're continuing to do today.
So, Reed, there's another 2 points that we can add to make this trifecta. There's the legal side, there's housing, and there's health as well, and you guys are securely in that equation there.
Yes, absolutely. So at Housing Works, one of the initial slogans after the organization was founded in 1990 is housing equals healthcare. And that's very clear no matter what population you're talking about, what group of people. Specifically, housing for people with HIV. We know that if a person living with HIV has access to stable housing, it means improved health outcomes. So it means you're more likely to be on treatment, be able to maintain treatment, more likely to achieve viral load suppression. And the same is true if you track housing status. If you are unstably housed or homeless, it makes you more at risk for other negative health outcomes like HIV. So, it's really important to have the health services, but also look at housing, look at the whole person, because if the person's basic needs aren't being met, it means downstream long-term health issues, other issues will come out of that.
And where are we right now on that front, Reed, in New York?
So in New York City right now, we really do have a homeless youth crisis. And so that's one area I think we really need to focus on. Homeless youth ages 21 to 25 is where we see the greatest need. We see waiting lists in a lot of homeless youth shelter service providers, and really making sure that group gets access to adequate housing is extremely important. So that's one area, and then in addition, expanding housing for people with HIV who are living outside of New York City. In upstate New York and Long Island, over 3,700 people with HIV estimated are homeless or unstably housed and have that housing instability. So if we can actually provide that access to stable housing, it will improve people's health. It'll actually result in long-term savings for this city and state and the local jurisdictions as well.
So, Omar, we hear just in learning about those stark numbers there, our theme week was, are we there yet? Looking at the gay agenda, and a lot of people point to marriage equality as this milestone on the path to full equality for all members of the society. But I wondered what other sort of legal battles are at hand when we're looking at housing insecurity, but there are also other issues pending in the courts even.
Sure. And the reality is that Obergefell decision and Lawrence and Windsor, all of these decisions having to do with respect from the federal government, recognition of marriage equality, the decriminalization of our very lives, they're just steps in the road to equality. And ultimately, the work that we're doing, like Reed mentioned, is multifaceted. The multiple oppressors that are affecting people, lack of employment, discrimination in housing, discrimination in healthcare, all of these things make it hard for people to succeed and have equal opportunity in life. And so we're fighting those battles all over the place. Just 2 months ago, we won the first victory under the Fair Housing Act to cover LGBTQ people ever in the country. And we did that in Colorado, where a lesbian couple, one of whom is transgender, and their 2 children were rejected from a housing, from an apartment they applied for because they were unique, and their uniqueness would make them stand out in the community. That is unacceptable, and that prevents you to have that stability that will let you succeed in life. These were 20-something-year-olds that were raising their children and trying to, with the burden of student loans, try to succeed and take care of their family. Yeah. And we got that victory. And similarly, what we're trying to achieve is a belts and suspenders approach. We need state protections like we have in New York for sexual orientation, but we still need to pass the agenda with regards to transgender people and gender identity. But we also need federal protections. Mm-hmm. And that requires not only the arguments that we're making in the courts that we're winning, like 2 months ago where we won the first victory at an appellate court in this country, where it said that Title VII, which prohibits employment discrimination in federal law, covers LGBT people. Right. Mm-hmm. That was a huge victory, right. But that is only part of the victory. Right. Having explicit protections, not just existing protections, which we already have and we argue we have, but explicit protections like gender, like
where are
Equality
we with gender? Because we talked about this last year, and it feels like where have we moved the needle at all in any way?
So in terms of gender, the Assembly has passed gender. The New York State Assembly has passed gender over 7 times. Like, so if it's a New York State law.
Potentially.
Exactly. So the Assembly's passed it. It has to be passed by Senate and Assembly. In the Senate, it hasn't even come up for a vote. So it's been killed in committee time after time. And this is a place where individual constituents can really have power, contacting their state senators. Yeah. Where do you stand on gender? Where do you stand on other important issues to LGBTQ communities? Right,
and that brings up something else for me, Reed. It's what I feel so helpless sometimes, like hearing about all these things, especially when policy is already in place and just no one's enforcing it. What can we lay people do at the city, state, and federal level that we're not doing right now, or that we could be doing more of in order to really make sure these things are being enforced or going into action?
So it's multifaceted. Mm-hmm. I think it's contributing and volunteering for organizations like Lambda Legal and Housing Works, and being able to also hold your elected officials accountable. Mm-hmm. That's not just calling, which you should do, but voting, and not refrain from voting. Not every elected official, not every political candidate is the same, and that matters. And really, it's also being an ally to LGBTQ people that you know, and being somebody who's compassionate and who is supportive of people when they're facing struggles, like employment discrimination, like housing discrimination. I should note that in New York State, the agenda has not passed. There are some explicit protections that were enacted via regulation by the Division of Human Rights of the New York State. Those are in place. But I think it is shameful that the Senate and the legislature has not passed gender. And I think it is shameful that New York State, which has been a beacon for equality and opportunity for everybody in this country, has actually fallen behind of a number of states. And we're talking 18 states that have enacted explicit protections on the basis of gender identity.
So let's see if we can prod a few people forward, because I know that a lot of people have been sort of reserving their vitriol for an office down in D.C. when there's some work to be done right here where we live. And as New Yorkers, particularly in New York City, we think, oh, we're the most progressive, we're leading, we're doing all these things, they should be like us. But is there something that you could say to sort of make the scales fall from our eyes to say, yeah, New York, you're cool, but we could be doing this even better? Like, you think that you're so progressive, but we have gender just stalling and dying. Are there other numbers you could share to shake us from complacency?
I mean, I think that, you know, if you look at so first of all, New York State, I think, has seen a lot of local leadership. Governor Cuomo did help move those regulations forward that protect transgender New Yorkers. Mayor de Blasio has been taking some important steps, but we need to see more across in the state legislature, particularly the Senate. And especially if your senator is part of the IDC, Independent Democratic Conference, which caucuses with the Republicans, it's important to know where they stand on these particular issues. And when it comes to you know, local issues, it's really, you know, just the act of introducing yourself personally to a representative. And that way, if they're not voting, they have to see your face when they're voting against you or killing something in committee. That makes a difference, as well as the phone calls. And I also think, you know, so in addition to local, we need to keep our eye on the Trump administration. 100%. What they're proposing in terms of health care will hurt a lot of New Yorkers and cost the state over $4 billion. 2.7 million people will become uninsured if this bill gets past the Senate. So
That's just in New York.
That's just in New York. 2.7 billion in New York.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. And really, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And really, we're in a moment in our history where we just need to be active. We need to be awake, and we need to know what's important and keep our eyes on the ball. And really, what we need to be doing is holding our local, our state, our federal elected officials all accountable. And we need to show up at those meetings, at those community meetings, at those town halls, and we need to really express what is needed of our elected officials to have an equitable and society and a government that really respects the dignity of all of its citizens.
Omar, where are we in terms of youth rights and education policies that you guys advocate for?
Sure. So, you know, with regards to youth rights, there are a number of issues that we're fighting this front on. Just a few weeks ago, we released a report co-authored with a number of other organizations called Safe Havens that really goes and documents the level of protection or lack thereof for youth in out-of-home care throughout this entire country, in every single state and at the federal level. And the numbers are stark. And as we know, over 40% of homeless youth are LGBTQ. This is a huge problem. That is one problem that we need to address. And when we see an administration that is taking away or rescinding or not enforcing regulations at the federal level that are meant to protect LGBTQ youth, that is alarming, not just by the very act of what they're doing, but also the message that they're sending, that the federal government won't protect you. That's one aspect, and the other one is schools. And we have a number of cases, one of which we got a victory just 5 days after the Trump administration rescinded the guidance that sought to protect transgender students in schools. We won that case, saying that the Equal Protection Clause of the U.S. Constitution applies to all public schools, and they have to treat transgender students according to who they are.
Omar, can you tell us specifically what numbers we're talking about when you say 40% of all homeless youth are LGBTQ? What does that really mean numbers-wise? And Reed, I'm sure you can.
Yeah, and how that translates in New York.
Yeah, so in New York City, there's a waiting list of hundreds of young people who are homeless. Knowing exactly what percentage are LGBTQ is hard to tell, but it really is the vast majority in New York City. And so this is, I believe, an issue that there needs to be more community outrage over. And that, I think, more pressure on local leaders, city council, the mayor, to address this. If we're going to address homelessness overall in the city, we need to address youth homelessness as well. In addition to that, really looking at comprehensive sexual health education, Scenic, the Sexuality Education Alliance of New York City, did a quick poll recently. They showed that 59% of students did not learn about consent in school, 63 did not learn about gender identity, 66 did not know where to go for sexual health or reproductive health care services. So our sexual health education is failing in New York City. This is an area where local folks can actually make a huge difference and exert real pressure.
Well, there we have our marching orders.
That's right.
Just ran up against our time, but we appreciate Lambda Legal and Housing Works for the work you're doing. You guys have to come back.
Thank you.
And not just in June. Like, let's keep this dialogue going.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us.